I know what it feels like to eat a meal and immediately regret it, to go years with symptoms that were real, disruptive, and completely dismissed along the way. I was told it was stress, I was told it was anxiety, I was told it was all in my head, and it wasn't. It was SIBO, and this was over 10 years ago, even before it was even more recognized than it is today. And it was connected to some things in my gut, my history, and my stress chemistry that no one ever put together for me. I'm Dr. Kenny, root cause health detective and IFM certified functional medicine practitioner. And in this video, I'm sharing my own story, not as a performance in any way, but because understanding what was actually driving my symptoms changed how I think about every SIBO case that I see in practice today. And it might change how you're looking at yours too. For years, my digestive system was the thing that I managed my life around, not the thing that I understood deeply like I do now. I had chronic acid reflux, and I mostly accepted that as part of life. Meals that should have been unremarkable would leave me bloated, uncomfortable, running a mental inventory of what I might have eaten wrong or done wrong. I was, in particular, a hydrogen-dominant form of SIBO, if you've gone through the different forms yourself, though I didn't know that for a very long time. What I knew was that something wasn't working, and there were deeper questions to be asked, and that no one I had seen had been able to explain it in a way that was actually connected to anything in my real life. I tried things too, a lot of things along the way. I went the natural route first, herbal antimicrobials, dietary changes, elimination diet protocols. Some of them helped, but symptoms would ease for only a short stretch of time, and I'd think I'd finally found the answer. Then they'd come back in a big way. I tried rifaximin, the main prescription for SIBO. Same pattern. Relief was temporary and then it would return. And I also tried the low FODMAP approach. I got good at identifying which foods triggered what, but it wasn't consistent with each and every FODMAP, which made it very difficult to manage and navigate as well. But managing triggers is not the same as understanding why the triggers existed in the first place. The difference between managing symptoms and understanding the pattern underneath and truly healing, that's what nobody truly offered me yet. The research reflects this in a way that I found clarifying once I started looking at it through a clinical lens. This study is a little older, but it holds true, is that a 2008 randomized controlled trial found that antibiotic treatment alone for SIBO produced significantly higher recurrence rates compared to antibiotic treatment followed by a probiotic course. Single layer treatment, regardless of how effectively it was initially at resolving symptoms, led to a more predictable relapse. What that study pointed toward was what my own experience also showed me along the way, is that the sequence and the depth of the approach matters more than the intensity of any single intervention. By the way, I've put together a free research summary for this video that the citation I just mentioned above and the others I'll continue to reference today are in. Check it out. The link is in the description and the pinned comment below if that interests you. Here's what was actually happening inside my body during those years of guessing. And maybe the same is true for you. The hydrogen dominance piece was a signal about my bacterial environment, but the bacterial environment was downstream of something else. My stomach acid wasn't where it needed to be. That was a huge lever for me. Chronic acid reflux, counterintuitively, is often not a straightforward excess acid problem. In many cases, it reflects a motility and a pressure dynamic issue that are occurring, maybe even further up in the nervous system. And the acid itself may not be adequate to properly trigger what needed to happen next in my digestion. Food was sitting longer than it probably should have, especially protein, because stomach acid strength is so important for protein digestion. And then at the same time, because of some of the nervous system undertones, not only was the stomach acid a huge piece of my puzzle, but so was my motility and my nervous system gut connection. My migrating motor complex, which is something I covered in the previous video, was also likely running very sluggishly, which allows for bacteria to sit in areas that it shouldn't for longer periods of time. So here was this double whammy experience, so that anytime I cleared the bacterial load with the treatment, whether it was the rifaximin or the herbal antimicrobials, the environment hadn't changed. The conditions were still favorable and thus set the stage for regrowth. The cycle would just run all over again. If you've watched the video on the SIBO cycle, this is exactly what that framework maps. If not, I'll link to it at the end here. What I hope this video shows you is what that framework looks like inside the experience, not just from this clinical observational framework distance. The lever that took me the longest to understand and for a practitioner to finally recognize was the missing piece in my case was the nervous system piece. And I think that this is one that gets left out of most SIBO conversations, which is part of why so many people stay stuck even when they're doing a lot of the right things. Your digestive system, plainly put, does not operate independently from your stress physiology, from your mental health, from your biopsychosocial environment. Your vagus nerve represents the primary communication channel between the gut and the brain, and it is a two-way street. And this nervous system connection plays into each and every one of my underlying drivers, which was the acid and the low motility piece. When the nervous system itself is in this chronic protective pattern, which, let's be honest, many of ours are in contemporary society, whether we perceive it or not, those finer functions of the gut-brain connection get deprioritized. The body shifts resources, and over time, the digestive environment that results is exactly the kind that enables overgrowth, which is probably why we're seeing it so commonly. A 2011 study identified these connections directly. Psychological stress suppresses gastric acid secretion, it slows MMC activity, and it alters the integrity of your gut barrier. These mechanisms run through something called the HPA axis, or the way your brain and adrenals are coordinating your stress response. And one of the primary ways that it does this is through that rest and digest nervous system control, as well as the hormonal pieces involved. This governs all of these functions that are not under our conscious control. And this is not a soft connection. This is the gut-brain connection in real life. These are documented biological pathways that explain why a nervous system under sustained load produces the conditions that are more favorable to SIBO. In my case, there was something more specific underneath that chronic stress chemistry pattern that was in my life. I carried stored psychological stress from earlier in my life. And I think it's important to talk about this in this video, which is not necessarily about trauma processing, but because the research is clear that it belongs in this clinical picture of gut health conversations. A landmark review published in Gastroenterology in 2016 identified that early life adversity and trauma history, they are among the strongest predictors of functional gut disorders in adults. The mechanism is not just this psychological experience of trauma, the way many people assume that somehow the mind and the body are not connected. It operates through altered nervous system functioning and this HPA axis programming from those traumatic experiences. How the nervous system learns to calibrate its responses to stress signals, including the quiet low-grade signals that are running throughout your gut every day. That physiological piece was affecting my digestive chemistry in ways that no herbal antimicrobial protocol or antibiotic course was designed to reach. So what shifted for me and when? The honest answer is that what changed was the level of investigation. And the practitioner who changed it wasn't doing anything exotic or completely out of the box when it comes to the just logical understanding of SIBO. What they did, though, was look at me as a whole picture at once, instead of handing me one piece at a time and waiting to see what worked. For the first time in my life, I felt someone was asking me about my stress and trauma history alongside my gut symptoms, and about my sleep alongside my motility and bowel movements, and even about my nervous system regulation and my diet at the same time. The symptoms were not being treated as this isolated problem to be solved and tamped down. They were being read as a pattern that had some very real logic to it. This personal healing experience is a significant part of what drew me toward functional medicine and eventually into this line of work, because no one in the conventional structure had the time or the framework or that deep root cause understanding to connect those pieces into something coherent. The layering is what made the difference. Not a single better treatment, but a sequenced approach that addressed the terrain, the digestive environment, and the nervous system pieces together. in an order that made sense for where my system actually was. The herbal work and the rifaximin had a different effect once the nervous system piece was being addressed. Not because these protocols were stronger by any means, but because the environment they were working in had started to change and to support them differently. And I'm not sharing this because my story is necessarily your story. It may not be. Hydrogen dominant SIBO with a nervous system and a trauma component is just one presentation of SIBO. Yours may be different. There are others. What matters is the level of thinking and the investigation that applies to your specific case. If you're looking at your own unique patterns like this, with my eyes on your case, the next step is to watch my free training that goes in to prepare you for what I call my health mystery map call. If you're in one of the states I practice, I'd love to have a conversation with you. If you feel this resonates deeply, there's a link in the description below. Here's what I keep coming back to, both in my own experience and in the cases that I see in practice. The investigation itself has to go deep enough to find what's actually driving the pattern in your specific case. Missing any one of your root causes can get you temporary results at best. And that's not a failure of effort. It's a failure of the deeper questions that should be asked alongside SIBO. The shift that finally moved the needle was not a better supplement or a better treatment or a stricter diet. It was a practitioner who was willing to hold the whole picture at once. If you haven't seen my video on the SIBO cycle yet, check it out. It's this one here up at the top. What most people haven't asked yet is how far the gut pattern reaches into your life. Not just into digestion alone, but into how clearly you think, how consistently you perform, and how much capacity you actually have. And that's exactly what this video down here goes through. So check out how gut health impacts your clarity and your success. I'm Dr. Kenny, Root Cause Health Detective. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.